Hi there, welcome back to 3D Creations. Now this week we're going to take something that is made out of the same piece, just in different configurations, and that being this picnic table. Picnic tables are great to have in the background of any scene. I've added a birthday cake and some cups around just to bring it a little more alive, but we're not going to be building that in this tutorial, just as an example of what you can use this for. So, we're going to be obviously doing a lot of copying and pasting, and I also wanted to explore how objects merge when grouped together, and how we can get the look we're after when doing that. So, let's open up a new work plane, and the picnic table itself is just going to be a bunch of boxes all over and over again. And for the sake of this example, I'm not worrying about color. A red picnic table is fine. So I am going to squish this down to a height of 5. Now, that's to get sort of a 2x4 aesthetic. So I'm going to squish it down to 10 wide and 5 tall. It's twice as long as it is tall. That will give us the right sort of proportions to make it seem you can switch it down a little bit more if you need, and we will be doing that with some other pieces. So we can stretch this out to make one plank. Now, when we are going to be merging things together, if I copy and paste and put these right next to each other, there's no space between them, and that's great. We can tile these together and have a whole lot of planks. However, once we group these, that seam completely vanishes. And that's because we're working with a absolutely perfect square structure. Every side is at 90 degrees to the other. And that's not really how the real world works. Especially public picnic tables, they get beat up, people climb on them, and they get pretty much just beat up over the course of time. So in order to simulate that, we need to round those corners off a little bit. And we can do that by this radius setting. Now normally, if you have a square, you can use the radius tool to blend between a sphere and a box. It just sort of rounds out those corners depending on how far you push it. Steps will get rid of how many sides you have to the rounding. So if we bump that up and drop this down, we get like two pyramids stacked on top of each other. Or we can extrude it out and get more detail. So we can use that to our advantage. At this stage, we can bump the radius just up a little bit to 2, and that will give us just these ever so slightly rounded edges. Now it does taper the length of it more than I would like, so later on we will be chopping off the edges, and it's important to think about that ahead of time. So now that we have rounded edges a little bit, if I put these right next to each other and then I group them, once it's done thinking, they are intersecting, so they're part of the same thing, but we have this like V area where they sort of come together in a seam, much like planks of wood in a picnic table, or even planks of wood on floors. Keep an eye out for it. And all those little seams, they drop down just a little bit. And that is a great way that we can use to separate these out and blend the mesh together in a pleasing way. So I'm going to copy and paste both of those and stack them together, and then once more will give us the top of our table. So for this example, we're going to stick with 6, and this is what I meant by it tapers lengthwise. So as it comes towards the edge, it tapers in, and that's not really what picnic tables look like, so we're just going to cut off a couple inches either side. And that will get us a closer approximation to a picnic table. Now, I'm going to take one of these groups of 2. I'm going to copy and paste and move it over. and copy and paste and move it to the other side. These are going to be our benches. And they should be just barely off the edge, but we do want a little bit of a gap. Make sure it's the same distance on either side, or to the best of your ability. Now we can group the inner 6 together just so that they don't go anywhere. Now select everything, move everything up just a little bit, about, 20-ish. Now we can move the center bit, maybe about 40, about double. Now we can get to work with, if we want to grab, I'm actually going to take one more of these and ungroup it. Now we have 2 planks that we can work with, and I am going to rotate both of them this way 90 degrees. And then we can squish them down. I'm holding Alt to modify both sides at once. I'm going to select the top section, make sure that those guys are exactly in the middle. Now I'm going to separate them out. These are going to be support planks that are used to keep the top surface, the tabletop, to keep all of those planks together. Now, as we scoot up, it's okay if there's intersecting a little bit. These don't have to be as thick, so feel free to, if it goes in, intersects a little bit, that's totally fine. Alright, so now that we have those looking supported, we can now start adding legs. I'm going to, once again, copy and paste one of those support beams we just made, and I'm going to flip it on its edge, and then we can stretch it out a little bit. I don't know, maybe 100 seems extreme. We can stretch it out to about 80-ish. And I want to go to about that 67.5 angle, because it's not quite 45, but it's a little bit further. And I'm going to take this and align it to that support beam we just made, just to make sure it's in the center of that. Scoot it on over. Drop it down a little bit. Now, I'm going to be cutting those excess pieces off, but I want to do that all at once, because the more times you have to cut things, the worse it's going to look, or the longer it's going to take to figure out where everything is. The longer it will take to group. That's what I'm trying to say. Now that I have 2 legs set up, I'm going to just copy and paste them, and then use the mirror tool in the upper right to flip them around and space them out just a little bit. I am trying to use guides. Whoa. So, like right now, each leg is just barely starting to poke out on either side of that center plank. It's not exactly perfect, but that's okay. And that way we can keep them relatively centered and evenly spaced. Now, you guessed it, we're going to copy and paste these once again, and we are going to rotate it back to the 90, so just undo the 67.5, or if it's easier, just grab one of these side pieces and you should be able to accomplish the same thing. And I am going to align it with the top, make sure it's nice and centered, drop it down to just below those the seats, stretch them out. Now we will not be overlapping or cutting this one, so it's okay if it slopes up. it just looks like the table's been banged up a little bit more. And we do want to pull it out to one side of those legs because these are 2 planks of wood. You can't have them intersecting. There we go. That's about right. And now I'm just going to copy and paste and drag it over. Hold shift to make sure you're not moving it anywhere else, just in that one line. Okay. Now we have the benches in place. We have the top. We have the legs. Now we can move on to cleanup. I'm just going to take a couple of box holes and I'm going to merge it into the table, stretch it out, and make sure it's engulfing the tops of that of the legs that are sticking through. And then I'm going to copy and paste that, move it down to below the ground so that we can chop those extra bits off, because the table legs need to be cut flat with the ground. And now I'm going to select all of the legs and the other boxes and group. And that will, oh, we missed just a little bit. So this bottom one needs to be a little bit bigger. That's all. Then we have the legs chopped off and no more parts poking out. And then to chop off the sides, we're just going to add a small box, make sure it's tall enough, stretch it out, and we don't need to cut off much. Just a little cleanup is all that's needed. Try to match up the amount that is cut on either side. If it's not perfect, it's perfectly fine. Alright, select both of those, the top and the benches, group those, and it should just trim those edges off and give us a more uniform look. There we go. That is our table, so go ahead and select everything and group it into one object that we can then move and place in a larger scene, and we won't leave any pieces behind. And as you can see, this is all one thing, but each individual plank is still defined and it still looks like one solid piece. So with that, you have completed a picnic table, and I hope you had fun. So try this out for yourself. See you next week.